Dear ladies and gentlemen, I am Andrei Shevchenko. On behalf of Ukrinform and Ukraine Media Center, I welcome everyone who shares the word about our fight for the freedom. Our speaker today is Oleksandr Motuzyanyk, the Speaker of the Ministry of Defense. Dear friends, hello. Here are the traditional news updates on Russia's military aggression as of today, midday. We still have the continuation of the great liberation war of the Ukrainian nation. It is the 93rd day of the heroic battle of our country against large-scale Russian invasion. The occupation troops of the Russian Federation are using firepower along the contact line in Luhansk and Donetsk region. The situation is difficult, but the armed forces of Ukraine are controlling it, and they are aware of the plans of the enemy. There is still a threat of missile attacks on civilian and military infrastructure in Ukraine from the territory of Belarus, which is noticeable by the movement of ground-launched cruise missiles from Osipovичи in Mogilov region to the borderline regions of Brest region. According to Ukraine's intelligence, in the training grounds Pokhonovo and Bohuchar in Voronezh region of Ukraine, there is a training of 1,500 of the reserved troops. And after this 3-week training, these troops can be used in the military operations in Ukraine. Also, the enemy continues to hit military and civilian targets in Ukraine. Among other things, the attacks have happened near Bakhmut and Soledar in the Donetsk region. The occupiers were using Tu-95 MS and Tu-22 M3 fighter jets. Also, they continue the tactics of terror against civilians in the occupied regions. Specifically in Mariupol, there are critical problems with electricity and water supply. The locals are not satisfied with the corrupt actions of the occupied governments. Some of the food products that are imported as the so-called humanitarian cargoes from the territory of the Russian Federation are then sold in the local stores. This was the general situation, and now more information about specific areas of combat operations. In the Kharkiv axis, the armed forces of Ukraine are fighting against the Russian troops of the 6th Army and also the coastal forces of the Baltic Fleet and the mobilization reserve of the so-called 1st Army Corps. So they are holding the occupied positions and are trying to prevent the advance of Ukrainian forces. According to our intelligence, the occupiers are deploying the Borysaglebsk 2 electronic warfare system to fight against our UAVs. In the Sloviansk axis, the Ukrainian troops are fighting against the 1st Territorial Army, the 20th Army, the coastal forces of the Baltic Fleet, then the 29th, 35th, 36th armies, and the 68th Army Corps. So it's quite a strong military grouping, and they are trying to regroup their units and attempt an active advance in the areas of Izium-Barvinkovo and Izium-Sloviansk. In Donetsk region, the armed forces of Ukraine are fighting against the 8th and 58th armies of the South military district, also the 5th Army, the coastal forces, and also the Russian paratroopers. So the enemy is active in Liman, Severodonetsk, Bakhmut, Karakhove, and Avdiivka areas. Their main area is to encircle our troops near Lysychansk and Severodonetsk and get to the administrative border of Lugansk region. In the Liman axis, Ukrainian defenders are fighting against the enemy, which attempts to push our troops from Liman and to advance to Slavyansk. It is predicted that the occupiers of the 90th Tank Division will be using the Terminator support vehicles. In Severodonetsk axis, the Ukrainian troops are fending off the enemy attacks in the areas of Shedryshevo, Severodonetsk, Askalonivka, Borivsky, and Nizhny Toshkivka. In Bakhmut environs, Ukrainian troops are under fire of the enemy artillery and aviation, and they are holding the enemy attacks in the area of Komyshovacha. In Avdiivka axis, the Ukrainian army is fighting in the area of Novoselivka II, Krasnohorivka, and Novobakhmutivka and Krasnohorivka. Near Novopavlivka and Zaporizhia axis, the enemy is using combat aviation, and also in Southern Bug axis, the main efforts are intended to hold the occupied positions, to keep our troops, and prevent using of the Ukrainian troops in other areas. The enemy continues to use firepower on the units of the armed forces of Ukraine and is trying to bring more fuel and lubricants. In Siversky axis, the enemy is taking action to strengthen the Ukrainian-Russian border in Bryansk and Kursk regions of Russia and to prevent the use of our troops in other areas that could be threatening for it. There is a possibility of missile attacks on military and civilian infrastructure, and also artillery shelling of the borderline regions of Ukraine. In Volyn and Polisia, there are still noticeable actions of the 7 battalions of Belarus, which are strengthening the Belarus-Ukraine border in Brest and Homel regions. And also there is still a threat of missile attacks on our territory from the territory of the Republic of Belarus. According to Ukraine's intelligence, Belarus is testing its response forces. For instance, on the 26th of May in Brest Oblast, there was military training concerning liquidation of illegal militia in urban conditions. In Chernomorsk and Azov operational zones, the situation is rather stable. The ships of the Black Sea Fleet in the waters of the Black Sea and the Azov Sea are continuing to isolate the combat area and are also blocking the commercial traffic. Also, I would like to point out that in the waters of the Black Sea, there are 2 caliber ships with a total of 16 missiles on them, and also, meanwhile, the armed forces of Ukraine and other militarized forces of Ukraine are continuing their defense operations, incurring considerable losses on the Russian troops. Over the last day in Donetsk and Lugansk region, our fighters have successfully fended off 12 attacks of the enemy, have destroyed a tank, 5 artillery systems, 5 units of armored equipment, and 5 motor vehicles. Also, they knocked down the UAV Arlan-10 and also a helicopter, Ka-52. Also, a missile was destroyed in Chernivtsi region, by the fighter jet of the armed forces of Ukraine. You can also see the total losses of the enemy on the screen. That's it from me. Questions, please. Vitaly Holub, Ukrinform. Speaking of the Black Sea area, we have had reports about the readiness of the missiles that are ready. And where did the cruise missile on Chernivtsi was launched from? Over the last day, we did not see any attacks from the sea, but still were attacks from the long-distance locations. They can attack us from the territory of their country without entering the airspace of Ukraine.
Okay, yes. So as you were saying, we are more.
Just give us 1 second.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
As you were saying, we are now more than 90 days of war, full invasion from Russia. So are you seeing a certain, maybe informative, maybe diplomatic fatigue within the allies?
Within the allies?
Yeah, the Western nations.
Дипломатична та інша втома серед наших союзників.
Difference. Personally, I am not noticing this, but I am not entitled to comment on international issues on the diplomatic field and technical collaboration, etc. For this purpose, we have our diplomats, which are also fighting for the independence of Ukraine. So this is something on which I cannot comment, but personally, I do not see any fatigue, and we can see support that is provided by our allies, and it is already used in other zones of combat operations. We, of course, would like this to be happening faster, but there are certain stages of this process.
And also another question, a few days ago, I think it was Zelensky who said that there were more about 100 deaths within the army in the east, also after the developments in Popasna and Svitlodarsk. It seems like there was an advance of the Russian troops in the east. How is now the morale of the troops, the psychological? I imagine there's a lot of pressure there now.
I can answer the following way. Right now, here in this slide, you can see the losses of the occupiers, and this shows how high is the motivation of our troops. The morale is on the proper level. We still have the fighting spirit. We are fighting for our land, and for us, this is a fully righteous war. This is a great liberation war for Ukraine, and it has started, by the way, in 2014. The 24th of February is the continuation in the form of a large-scale military invasion of the Russian Federation. Please believe that the morale of the Ukrainian army is on a very high level. Other questions? I believe we can stop here. This was Oleksandr Motuzyanyk, the Speaker of Ukraine's Ministry of Defense. Thank you. Glory to Ukraine. This is the end of our